Hey, everybody, got a fantastic discussion today. As you know, as everyone knows, a new album came out by Kanye called Jesus is King. And boy, I'll tell you what, it's fire. It's definitely a gospel album, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. He did an interview with a guy named Big Boy. That's what the guy goes by. And it's a really good interview. I really enjoyed it. They talk about a lot of interesting aspects of Kanye's life, his perspective, his transformation. And that is what I'm going to talk about in this podcast. We're going to discuss the interview in some detail and hit some points that I thought were important. So get ready, buckle up, and just a reminder, you can follow me at my website, tstuch.com, tstuch.com, tstuch.com. Follow me on YouTube. Subscribe, Taylor space Stuch, Taylor space Stuch. Follow me on Twitter, tstuch1. Email me, tayradio1@gmail.com. That's tayradio1@gmail.com. And follow me on Twitter, tstuch1, guys. So, enjoy. Let me know what you think. So Kanye West did an interview a few days ago, maybe, around the same time as his album that was released called Jesus is King. He did about, I don't know, an hour, maybe a little over an hour, less than an hour, about 45 minutes of an interview with a guy named Big Boy. So Big Boy apparently has Big Boy TV on YouTube. Never heard of him before this. But I've been extremely interested in the Kanye phenomenon. So first, let's talk about a little bit about what was in the interview. So first off, I have to say a little bit about Kanye is he's definitely matured more throughout these interviews. I saw his interview with Charlemagne. I saw some of his other interviews last year, like on TMZ and stuff like that. And he just wasn't as put together. You could say he didn't have as much of his, his thoughts weren't necessarily as coherently fitting as they are now. So that's one thing, is you definitely see an evolution in his thinking and his understanding. In this interview, he's able to put things together, in my opinion, in a better light. So let's see. One of the things that they talked about, of course, was the breakdown. They talked about his breakdown, his mental breakdown, how he went to the hospital, what was it, a year and a half ago. And I thought that was really interesting. So first off, he talked about his breakdown a little bit. And it's not just his breakdown, but also they described it in the interview as his transformation as well. It's kind of when he started going through a transformation. And he made some really good points. That somebody like him has a lot of stuff on his shoulders. And it's something that is obvious, but at the same time, I think we forget about that with very famous people. Not only just famous people, but people that are really producing their own stuff. So Kanye was talking about how he's basically, he keeps saying that he's like a $3 billion company. I'm not sure where he gets that number from, but I mean, regardless, he's running some high level shit. He's got his shoe company, he's making music, he's got a family, he tours. And so he brought all of that up about how he's doing all of those things. He also talked about how he's been in debt. And this is a theme that has come up with a couple of interviews I've seen him in. So in his interview, I believe with Charlemagne a year and a half ago, he talked about the debt situation, how that's something that's really been on his mind. Basically, he makes a lot of money, and he believes that his brand and his business are worth a lot of money, but he's in a lot of debt, and he was talking about that. So not only does he have the pressure of his of running his company, being with his family, taking care of his kids, and touring. But he's also been under this immense financial pressure from being in a large amount of debt while also living this lifestyle. And so he talked about how, yeah, of course, because he said basically, look, I've been working nonstop, I've been working extremely hard, and yet I keep basically getting swindled in these deals where now I'm even in like a ridiculous amount of debt. And so for him, that is, it caused a lot of stress, a lot of problems. And yeah, he had a bit of a breakdown. And that's understandable. Especially, I mean, for one, we have seen, I think as a population, we've seen in America at least, probably all over the world, we've seen celebrities, Britney Spears, I'm sure there's a ton of them who go through breakdowns. And a lot of that probably has to do with just the public pressure, right? Like you go through an immense public scrutiny. And so that alone can break people. Then you add on top of that all of the other things like running a business, basically designing shoes, designing clothes, going on tour, having a family, being in financial distress, with all the debt. You put all those together. And also, when you feel like you've put in so much work as he has, or really anybody, if you feel as though that you've been working and hustling, and you turn around and you just keep going into debt, and you realize it's because of these deals and things that you're structuring, that people are just taking advantage of you, then yeah, you're going to have some problems. One thing that he talked about was that he thought that his breakdown made him more relatable. And I think that's a really good point because basically, now, we've seen breakdowns with celebrities and stuff before. And I agree with him here. He says his breakdown made him more relatable because he's just another guy. Like he's just a dude and he's trying to deal with all this stuff. And I agree. What's funny is I also think, Nassim Taleb talks about how that was also one reason why Trump got elected, is because, not because he seemed relatable, but because when people talk about how he lost a lot of money in his businesses, well, it makes him human, right? It brings him out of the realm of the bullshit credentials that all these politicians tout, right? He's not so clean. He's got some dirt on him. And when I say some dirt, I don't mean like really, really bad stuff in his past, but I mean, he's got human stains. He's got human problems that anyone who takes risks goes through. And that's one thing that Kanye mentioned with his breakdown was like, look, he didn't mention it explicitly, that it makes him, I don't know if he said it makes him more human, but he definitely said it makes him more relatable. That he thinks it makes him more relatable. And I tend to agree. There's a lot of mental health issues going on nowadays in society. I think we've always kind of had some of these problems, but now with our lifestyles, I think they're more apparent. And definitely what he said, I think I would agree with. So what's interesting, let's see, he talked about how, I've got some notes here, so I'm going through these. He talks about how white liberals are always trying to tell him to vote. Oh yeah, so this is a clip that's also been going around a little bit on Twitter, was how no matter what's going on, he's always dealing with white liberals telling him how to vote. So before he became real Christian, they would tell him, oh, well, you're black, so you need to vote this way. And now that you're Christian, you don't you think you should vote for, do you think Trump's really Christian or this, that, and the other? And his biggest thing is, I love how he approached this, because instead of going at necessarily debating the point of whether or not, voting for a particular person is Christian or not, or black enough, he straight up is like, look, I'm a free person. I can vote for who I want to vote for. Okay, so I think it's a bit of a sidestep from talking about if somebody aligns with Christian values, but his broader point is not whether or not somebody aligns with certain values. It's saying that because he's basically saying is that other people are saying, based on your identity, whether or not be a religious one or one of skin color, that it's usually white liberals who are saying, because of this, you need to vote this way, at least towards black people. And that is something I have seen a lot myself. I've talked to black people that I've gone, I live in the most diverse city in the country. So, of course, I have friends that are black. I've, run across that all the time. And I've talked to a few that have straight up been like, oh, yeah, like, of course, I've got to vote. I can't, they'll be like, of course I wouldn't vote for Trump. I'm black. He's racist, right? So there's a groupthink that goes on. So one thing I really like about Kanye in the interview is he talks about being free. And let's see, he talks about being free. So I really like that. He talks about how black people should own land. Black people should talk about basically becoming financially free and becoming free in general, instead of all the other bullshit that goes on in hip hop and rap music and rap culture. So it's a very powerful culture. Hip hop culture is very powerful in the United States and across other parts of the world. And basically he discusses how in that culture it's all about gangster activities. So I know I sound so white when I say that, gangster activities, but that's what he talks about. And it's something that a lot of people have bemoaned for a long time, but you don't hear that from a creator himself. So he talks about how hip hop culture is actually not good for the culture, and how ironic it is that people walk around listening to hip hop all day, which glorifies crime and not being a good person, and then turns around and talk about prison reform. How we need to get more people out of jail for and review the laws. Let's see here. Cancel culture. Very interesting. So, let's see here. Yeah, so some interesting points he brought up. Like I said, I'm just running through some notes here. When he talked about cancel culture, he said that he turned his back on cancel culture. And I really love that about the interview. Was throughout this interview, one of the themes is basically he's doing his own thing. He's got his own shit together, man. And he's not going to take shit from everybody telling him that he's a victim, that he has been victimized by the system, and that he's oppressed. So the fact that he is coming out the way he is, being like pro-MAGA and, I don't know, maybe not pro-MAGA, but his stances are he's trying to turn his back on victimhood culture. So hold on a second. We're going to run some ads on this bitch, and I'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Do you want to record your own podcast like me? Well, Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. That's right, mofos. It's easy. Check it out. Okay, back to cancel culture. So he talked about how he's turning his back on cancel culture, and was talking how basically black people are being, and not just black people, to be honest, this is being encouraged among a lot of different groups. People are being told to blame white people for their oppression. And that's true. It's very true. I see it a lot online. Sometimes you hear it in conversation. Basically, everyone's focused on blaming white people for their problems. And I've said in previous podcasts, the notion of that, a lot of that is absurd, especially because most of the white people that are in this country today, have come from all different backgrounds and had nothing to do with slavery. So that is a little crazy. I understand people try to make an argument for systemic racism, but I love the way he talks about victimhood culture. He turned his back on that shit. Here's what he talks about. How instead of talking about how white people are fucking everyone over, he's saying is, look, stop spending your money on shit that doesn't matter. Stop spending your money on shit that doesn't matter. And he brings up, and this is the thing, he talks about, buying shoes, expensive jewelry, and foreign cars. He talks about those a lot, like shoes, jewelry, cars. Like, stop spending your money on all of that shit and buy land. Buy land. So basically, invest in yourself. Invest in your family, invest in yourself. And it's a really good point. Because the message, and this is one thing that's also, I think, really good about the Hotep movement. So if you know anything about the Hotep movement, it's led by, I guess it's led by black guys. I'm not sure. I think so. But and I'm not sure where Hotep comes from, but it's essentially a black empowerment idea, but it's not some of the historical ways like, we're going to take over and create a revolution, so much as that it's more about getting your mind right. And there's a guy on Twitter named Hotep Jesus, and he's talked about this before in some of his interviews, and I really like it. I like some of what he says, and a lot of what he focuses on is that he's like, look, fuck all this victimhood shit. He calls that slave mentality. When you walk around pointing at Whitey saying, Whitey did this to me, Whitey did this to me, you're not doing anything productive. What he's saying is what we need to do is shift the conversation. We need to move people from victimhood and blaming others to how can we become wealthy ourselves? How can we become more empowered ourselves? So he talks about creating businesses and things like that. And that's exactly what Kanye talked about here was, look, buy land. Stop talking about buying foreign cars. Buy some motherfucking land. That's what you ought to do. And he went off a little bit on Democrats and liberals a bit. He talked about how black people have been voting for Democrats, and the Democrats have been been trying to been bribing people, especially poor people, with like food stamps and abortions, and talked about how black people are killing off their babies and stuff like that. It's, there's a lot of truth to that. So throughout all of this, he's saying it's so funny. Some of the stuff he says is not really that controversial, depending on the circles you run in. But in regard to popular culture today, all of the things I've talked about so far are really controversial. And it's, in my opinion, he's risking his whole brand. I actually think he'll come out ahead on this. I really do. I think he'll come out ahead on his transformation. I think he'll come out ahead on Jesus is King, on all of it. So the interviewer, Big Boy, asks him, like, who does he fear? And he was like, look, dude, I only fear God. I don't fear losing my audience. I only fear God. And, I don't consider myself a religious person, but that's powerful shit, man. That's powerful shit. And the thing is people got to understand, when you're watching this interview, you're not seeing a man who is so confident that he can do no wrong. You're seeing a man who is actively battling these questions today. So that's one thing that you notice about him is when he talks about this, when he says, look, I only fear God, you believe him, but at the same time, it's a struggle. And so he's putting out what he believes he needs to put out, regardless of the public opinion against him. And I've got to be honest, that is true skin in the game, baby. True skin in the game. He's risking his brand, the survival of his brand and his business, to put out a message he believes in. That is fucking skin in the game if I've ever heard it, if I've ever seen it, man. And that is directly from Nassim Taleb. But it's not from Nassim Taleb so much as what he's bringing back into the culture. So he talks about how families are the key to health, how people, especially in the black community, but, The white community's having a lot of problems with this now as well. Divorce rates are high, broken families are getting higher. So he's talking about how families are key to people's health and societal health. Now, I'm going to start wrapping this up a little bit here. Towards the end of his interview, I'm going to skip some other shit there. He talked about some really cool stuff that I really liked. So I don't know how they got on this topic, I don't recall, but he was talking about how people at MIT need to save the world and stop worrying about college loans and their careers. And oh my God, I love that. I love that. He says, look, do it yourself. He was talking about people. He was talking about these brilliant kids, these brilliant students, these brilliant minds. They could be entrepreneurial. They could be inventing shit. But instead of doing it themselves, what they're doing is they're taking out loans to go to college so they can get a job somewhere. And they're, doing research that's funded by the school and the government and this, that, and the other. So they can't really do their own thing. Everything's very directed about where it can go. And he was basically like calling out to all of the brilliant people in colleges, start doing your own shit. He talked about how people at MIT could save the world if they did their own stuff. And I love this message. In my opinion, this message also dovetails with some of what I hear from Nassim Taleb. So Taleb talks about how the biggest advancements in technology, or not maybe the biggest advancements in the tech space today, but like at least he talks about how the most important stuff we see is by people that are tinkering, people that have their free time and they start making things. And then boom, they come up with the discovery. But they're doing it on their own. It's not funded by the government. That's not where all of the innovation happens. Now, I think there is some debate about some innovation coming from like the military and stuff like that, for sure. But when it comes to what caused the Industrial Revolution, right? Like what got us here, at least up to this recent point where governments were funding shit, what got us here was people tinkering on the edges, right? People saying like, oh, we've got, some inventions here. We've got some inventions there. And actually, this is true. Like anyone can look this up. Look at scientists and inventors back in the day. Look at people like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, all these, a lot of great entrepreneurs and scientists, the people that came up during the Enlightenment times and the Renaissance times. A lot of people that were coming up with inventions or spreading ideas were doing things on their own time. Of course, it's not perfectly laid out like that, but a lot of people had jobs, a lot of people had work, and in their additional time, they were tinkering in their labs and they were playing with machinery. I mean, look at the Wright brothers. I don't believe the Wright brothers who came up with the airplane were funded by the government. Actually, let me go ahead and check that. Were the Wright brothers funded by the government? Were the Wright brothers funded? So, let's see, a tale of government investment. So, let's see here on history.com. What does it say? So, history.com, Wilbur and Orville Wright were inventors and pioneers of aviation. They achieved their first power-sustained and controlled airplane. They surpassed their own milestone 2 years later when they built and flew the first fully practical airplane. Let's see, funding. So it says using the profits from their labors to fund their earliest experiments. So yeah, it looks like they funded all of it themselves. And so I guess what you could say is, yeah, different countries and governments made huge improvements to aviation, but, or, companies, like I'm sure big companies have made improvements to aviation, but the initial spark which changed the world was people just tinkering in their free time. That was life-changing, right? Ever since the airplane's been invented, our lives have been changed forever. So fantastic point here, and I love how he encourages people to do that. Now, I'm going to rant a little bit more, is that this is also something that I have been falling in love with myself, and I've been learning why it's less practical for people to do it nowadays. Really, the more debt you get into, the less possible this is. The more debt you're in, and sometimes the more education you get, it hinders you from taking the risk that you ought to take. Gary Vaynerchuk also talks about this, how people 20 to 30 really need to be a lot more risky. And when he means risky, he doesn't mean like go have unprotected sex. He means like need to be more financially risky. So that doesn't mean take out a bunch of loans, but that means work up and save and invest that money in something that probably isn't going to work but might. And that is what Kanye's message is as well. To a degree, he's like, look, stop worrying about all you brilliant motherfuckers out there. Start making shit, right? We need to move the culture away from being just employed and working just for governments and big corporations, because that's what a lot of funding comes from for colleges. Move away from that model and start doing it yourself. Save up money, get a 3D printer, start making your own shit. Save up money, learn how to do something, start making your own shit. And he talks about how if we unleashed that potential on everybody, we could have a lot of shit. So that was some of my breakdown of the situation. And hopefully next time I'll talk about how I think Kanye, Chappelle, and some others are really driving cultural influence and change. And anyway, that's what I've got to say for today. It was a really good interview. In my opinion, this interview also made Kanye look very, very personable. He was fun. He was cracking some jokes. Overall, the interview was great because you also get to see a lot of his personality. You get to see, in the Charlemagne interview, I felt like he was more under pressure. It was a little more serious. This interview was more playful, fun. It was great. It was great to see. It makes him look really good, in my opinion. So you can check it out, Big Boy TV, the Kanye interview, Big Boy TV. You can follow me at tstutch.com. Check out my website. You can follow me on YouTube at Taylor Stutch, Taylor space Stuch. You can send me an email at tayradio1@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at tstutch1. And that is it, guys. Thank you for listening.